for a moment and wait for Kim to give us the all clear. Right. Steve, you may start.
Have you got me in?
Yes. Can everybody put the microphones off, please? So on to mute.
Great.
All yours, Steve.
Kia ora everybody, and welcome to our extraordinary council meeting this morning. Could I just introduce the meeting to begin with and let you all know that we are live streaming our meeting, and it can be open to the public, and the council website has got a direct link to the home page and the agenda and the live streaming. So the home page will be updated after the meeting with the minutes and the meeting summary. So that's just for everybody's understanding. For our community members that are watching this morning, before we get to our karakia, because this is a Zoom meeting, it's slightly different, and I'd like you to know who is participating in the meeting today. So if when I say your name, if you unmute and say good morning, I'll start with Deputy Mayor Dave Donaldson.
Morena.
Morning. Councillor Bentley.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Kai Fong.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning. Councillor Kumar.
Not present.
So we notice not present. Councillor McPherson. You need to unmute, Councillor McPherson.
I've tried a couple of unmute buttons, found one that works.
They're down to the bottom.
Everybody.
Kia ora. Councillor Maxwell.
Unmuting. Good morning. Kia ora koutou.
Good morning. Councillor Rokawa Tate.
Tēnā koutou katoa.
Councillor Tapsell.
Morena koutou katoa.
Councillor Wang.
Morena, everyone.
Morena. And Councillor Yates.
Ai, aungaki.
And we have our executive team and those that are going to be presenting papers also on this live stream. I want to just let you know what we're going to be covering this morning at the meeting. We're going to be talking about the Crown Infrastructure Partners, the sustainable procurement in the COVID-19 recovery program, the local government statement 2019-2020, the 2020-2021 annual plan guiding strategies, and the local government funding agency. So those are the major papers that we're discussing in this extraordinary council meeting. So this is a new process for us all in really, really challenging times. I want to congratulate first the staff who have managed to get this streaming facility up and running for us, but we've got to make our decisions in a very different way. So extraordinary times call for extraordinary arrangements in order for us to make our decision. Our standing orders are still in place, and in addition, some extra meeting protocols have been shared that will be there to ensure a good meeting process. So quite unprecedented times, and your tolerance and forbearance is really called for. Can I remind members that we're going to be sticking to very strict timeframes and speaking times, and they will be in line with our standing orders. Also, I want to remind members, I think we're getting better at this, that if you wish to ask a question, discuss an item or vote, you've got to go to your participants screen, check that all members know where it is. I'm sure you do. I'm seeing the way you all responded. Thank you to our greeting. So you click on the participants and raise the right hand button. Click on the lower hand button, or else the chair gets confused when I see your hand still up. And we've also said that during this council meeting, it's not a workshop, it's an extraordinary council meeting, so we're not going to exercise the chat button. because that is a distraction, I think, away from the papers that are being presented and that we're discussing. And also, could I please ask that you don't use the thumbs up because they sort of flood the screen, if you like what's being said. So that's just a reminder of our protocol this morning. Thank you for that, Una. This is following how other councils are also managing live streaming of these extraordinary times and meetings. So I'm now asking Councillor Dave Donaldson if you could open our meeting today with a karakia, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I won't ask members to stand, or they will vanish off their screens, I presume. So, hinoi tātou, e te atua kaharawa, ko koe te tohu rangatira, te tohu mātauranga. Manakitia mai mātou, wo pōnonga I tēnei wā, e mahi ne I a mātou mahi, mo te painga o ngā tangata, o te kaunihera o ngā roto o Rotorua. Tako mai kia tau te rangimarie ki runga I a mātou I ngā wā katoa. Ko ihu karaiti hoki tō mātou ariki amini. And in line with our bilingual kaupapa, Almighty God, who alone is the leader of all mankind and the fountain of all knowledge, send thy blessing upon us, your servants, this day, as we strive to do all things good for the betterment of the people of the Rotorua district. May we be tolerant in ourselves at all times, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Councillor Donaldson. And now we'll get to the part of the meeting where we get on with our discussion. And our item 2 on our agenda is, are there any declarations of interest?
Steve, we just need to call for any apologies first, please.
Oh, any apologies, sorry.
There
are no apologies, please note. And also please note Councillor Kumar is not in attendance. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? There appear to be none. Are there any urgent items not on the agenda? Councillor McPherson, are there any others? I'll note them first and then take them. Councillor McPherson, you have an urgent item.
Yes, it concerns the democratic decision making. There's 2 dimensions to this I'd like to raise, and that is that I note that in the most important task at the moment is planning economic recovery, that business and iwi reps are on the steering group and on the sector groups, but ratepayers are not represented. The second part is that we've yet to reinstall the SPNF and the O&M for the progressing of reports and for refining our policy positions on key issues. And so it seems to me they can be wrapped up in one discussion about democratic decision making. Thank you very much.
Note that. I will rule that out of order. We are getting to the working parties, and if I could just point out that we are democratically elected to represent our communities, and by that representation, that's why we're discussing these items today, and talking about the wider Build Back Better strategy. I'll leave that until the discussion on the paper that we're receiving later in the meeting, and the involvement there of those on the sector groups and the steering group. I think that's the right time, Councillor McPherson, to raise that. So they're not urgent items, and therefore I rule that out of order. The question about the resumption of committee meetings, I wonder, Una, if you'd like to speak to that. That is a question that we've all asked, and it's a little bit up in the air because we don't know what's happening with stage 3, but it's looking like a clearer date. Una, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So we are working on the process at the moment of standing up again all of the committee meetings for June, which means that through the month of May, we go through the process of preparing those agendas and preparing the reports. So we've done it this way because we've continued, as it looks like we'll be into level 3 for another week and a half or so. And also because of the timing and the planning for papers and the amount of work that is actually being put into the recovery plan and standing up these council meetings. So the two committees at this stage will continue just to be stood down and items on those agendas postponed until June. Things that are urgent that require the committee will come straight to a council meeting, as has been the process during Alert Level 4. Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got Councillor Rotorua Tate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy with that explanation given by Una, but I would like to see, certainly by June, that we're back fully participating, but back in chambers, participating as we have normally done in the past. There's no substitute for being able to sit there and look at each other and get a real sense of the discussion and that sort of thing. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I would reaffirm that it isn't our decision to make. The lifting of the levels for COVID-19 are a decision of central government, but it certainly is the will of all of us that we can be reinstating our meetings fully as soon as we come out of level 3. But that is so uncertain. We don't know when that is. Thank you. I move now to the confirmation of council minutes on page 7 of your order paper. Now we have some minutes here for the council meeting on the 27th of February and the extraordinary council meetings on the 25th of March, and I'll take those all as one. Do I have a mover? Prior to a mover, I see Councillor Tapsell, you have your hand up. Is it a query about the minutes, Councillor Tapsell?
Yes, it was just a slight correction on page 10, which is the meeting from the 27th. It still has my name next to some of the sewage committees, but I have requested and am no longer going to be a part of that. So that will require being updated, and I believe Phil Thomas, our chair of the Lakes Community Board, will also be replacing my name in some of those areas, given his role in the sewage committees in the past. So just a correction before we approve them.
Are you happy to move them subject to that correction, Councillor Tapsell?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Yates, you have your hand up. Is it a correction?
No, it was to second.
Second, thank you. And Councillor Kai Fong, you also have your hand up.
Just two quick questions. There's a "and" missing between the mihi and a minute silence under Councillor Maxwell responded with a mihi. And just a quick question, because we're going through the whole of the minutes, and it was a question to Una this morning. It may be that I've dismissed where that should be in the minutes, which was a confidential item. So I don't know if we should discuss that.
We moved the minutes.
Confidential minutes are approved in the confidential section of this meeting, so they'll be in there.
Yeah. So we have a mover and a seconder, and then I have Councillor Maxwell with his hand up. Councillor Maxwell, have you got an amendment?
Yes. On those minutes and that there, for the record, I think it was that was when it was approved for me to go to a sister cities conference in Ashburton. For the record, it was cancelled and postponed, no longer happening.
Right. Thank you. You're just noting that. Do you want that noted in the minutes?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So
yes, please.
Thank you. We have a mover, Councillor Tapsell, and a seconder, Councillor Yates, subject to those amendments. All those in favour, please say aye.
Raise your hand.
Raise your hand, a new participant.
Okay, that is carried.
Thank you. Thank you. And we now move to item 6, which is the recommendations from other committees. Could I just remind councillors to, yeah, great. We're all clear on the screen for moving on to the next committee meeting. That's the report recommendation from other committees, page 32 in your order paper, that the following recommendations of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee held on the 12th of March be adopted. I'll reread the recommendation. It's the adoption of the dangerous, affected and unsanitary buildings policy. Council adopt the dangerous, affected and sanitary building policy without change. The motion is open for discussion first, and Councillor Rotorua Tate has her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's just to move the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any questions for clarification? There appear to be none. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Dave Donaldson, thank you. There appears to be no discussion. It was a relatively straightforward motion. So all those in favour, please say aye. Before we do, I do see lots of hands up.
No,
this is the aye.
Voting. This is
Thank
the
you.
ayes.
Right.
That is carried.
Thank you. The matter is carried. Now we move, I'll give you a pause because you need to go back on your Stella to find it. We move to our first presentation, which is the COVID-19 update, noting the questions that were put as urgent business. JP, I wonder if you could move now to overview the presentation, the Rotorua Recovery Plan COVID-19. So over to you, JP.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Your Worship. Councillors, if hopefully you've got my opening slide on your screens now.
We do.
Okay. So, councillors, I'll go through this reasonably quickly because a number of the items that I will touch on in this presentation are also picked up again in items or agenda items more fully through today's agenda. So I'll just move through this reasonably quickly, councillors. So just to remind you, this was a part of the plan that we signed off on the 3rd of April, the Build Back Better plan. So one of the key links we had there was to make sure that we mirrored what government was doing. So for us, obviously the government is focusing very much on fighting the virus. Council has that responsibility under the lockdown as well for our essential services and making sure people are safe here in our community. But more importantly is starting to prepare for the cushioning the impact and positioning for recovery for our district. So that was really the intent of the strategy that you signed off on the 3rd of April. So councillors, just reminding you of those high-level strategies which formed the core of that plan. So really the key elements there was that intent to build back on Rotorua's unique strength. So that was one of those key strategies we put forward. Also that need to create a confident business environment that encourages investment and supports the emergence of new sectors. Now that's going to be critical for us in that philosophy around the Build Back Better. The other part of that was to work with business leaders to craft the innovative strategies to support impacted sectors. So again, that builds on that need to work with our business sector and those who have the knowledge of the business environment to make sure we tailor the right kind of strategies to make sure we have an effective recovery. Clearly also, we've got two sectors which are particularly important to Rotorua and the district, which were critically and severely affected as part of this COVID-19 pandemic, specifically tourism and wood processing, though we are starting to see some recovery more quickly in the wood processing space. We've talked in the past, and it was part of the discussion we took through into the council forum on the 23rd of April, was that discussion around making sure we're in a good position to leverage central government stimulus, but also to look at our own expenditure to drive employment in both the short and longer term. And obviously the council has an important role through its spending to support a number of local businesses, contractors, tradies, and their allied suppliers within our local community. And then finally, we made that priority for this term of council on the thriving, on the housing and thriving community strategy. So obviously a key plank of that was the locality planning. So obviously that's really important for us, particularly as it relates to the CBD and the recovery planning. So those were those key strategies which we've been focusing on. So again, councillors, I showed you this on the 3rd of April, which was sort of our view of moving from the short-term and immediate actions we needed to take through a continuum towards setting up a longer-term plan and longer-term initiatives. So if you recall at the time, at that 3rd of April meeting, one of the confidential items was a discussion around rates deferral and what needed to be put in place immediately to address the 4th quarter rates instalments, which were obviously due on the 20th of May. So obviously that's a discussion, and I know rates notices are going out at the moment, and so a lot of the information that our ratepayers of business and general household ratepayers need to know will be available for them to access any particular options around deferrals. And also we've been evaluating what could be done with recommencing our projects as we move from level 4 down to level 3, so I can provide some additional information. So starting to prepare for that medium and longer term, councillors, we had raised with you the need for us to submit to the government around potential stimulus projects. Obviously that's been undertaken, and also to start establishing these steering groups and sector groups to start thinking about longer term plans and initiatives that we may need to put in place. So that was sort of that moving from the short term to the medium term thinking with a longer term plan development evolving from that. So councillors, in regard to key actions to date, obviously I've just mentioned the rates relief scheme, which needs to be focused at this stage for the May 4th quarter payments. So obviously that was decisions made on the 3rd of April. I understand the communications material is going out or has already gone out, particularly for those who receive their rates notices by email. RED were asked to coordinate, so Rotary Economic Development were asked to coordinate the establishment of steering group and sector groups. So they went through and produced a set of terms of reference. They have now stood up all of this, stood up the sector groups to support that steering group, and they have a program over the next 5 weeks to work through exploring what options need to be taken and what initiatives potentially could be considered by council. In addition to that, and it's subject of an item later in the agenda, we also were required to put forward some applications of shovel-ready projects. So this was part of the government considering some immediate capital spending to create some stimulus within the local economy. In addition, we've just also put on the agenda today some steps we're taking around boosting local procurement to keep that value within our local community of council spending in particular. Ongoing, of course, is the provision of information and advice by RED to the business sector. Also working with RED, council has been involved in a number of meetings with other territorial local authorities within the region, and also working with the regional council on shaping a picture of what the impacts are happening across the Bay of Plenty. And also, as we've moved now into level 3, there's been a significant amount of work preparing and ensuring contractors were ready to stand up existing projects. So councillors, that's a brief overview of where we currently are. There was a question raised about involvement of ratepayers. Clearly, in our steering group and in our sector groups, all of the businesses and iwi representatives are ratepayers. So we've made sure that they're acutely aware of the views that they're shaping, some potential actions that will come back to council. So as Her Worship had mentioned, a lot of this information and certainly the signals of what we need to do to support the development of projects will go into the consultation document for the annual plan, which is an opportunity for the wider community to comment before we finalise our annual plan for this coming year. And additionally, of course, all initiatives will come back to council for your consideration. So again, that's the opportunity for you to make judgments on the appropriateness of investment. So councillors, happy to answer off any questions, though some of them may be better related to the items coming up on the agenda.
Right, and thank you for that, JP. I need to have a mover and a seconder first to receive the report. Could
we don't need to in this case, it is just a presentation.
Okay, so now open for questions, and I'll be noting who has the questions. At the moment, there appear to be none. Oh, yes. Councillor Rotorua Tate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The rates relief, the rates relief initiative that we've put in place for May, that's for just this quarter, isn't it? Because we're looking now, as we go forward, we're looking at perhaps another 12 months of rate relief. Is that correct?
Your Worship, yeah, through you, Your Worship. Yes, that's correct. So obviously this was the immediate action as it related to this fourth quarter of this financial year. So that's why you took that decision on the 3rd of April. And one of the things that we've got listed in the potential guiding strategies around the consultation document in this coming annual plan is the opportunity that you'll need to consider what you do into the next financial year as well.
Thank you. We know, Councillor McPherson, you had your hand up, but it's gone. Did you have a question? Oh, yes, Councillor McPherson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure if this is the right place for it or not, but in recent times, on the 27th of April, I distributed a response to the recovery plan in the bid for CIP projects. It runs counter to the presentation I've just heard, but I'd like it recorded somewhere, perhaps in as appendix to the minutes of this meeting. Would like to register the objections or that news release in the background document so that it is more widely available to people that are following this meeting. Is there a device or method by which we can do that? Thank you.
Councillor McPherson, I'll just answer that. You're probably speaking to the next item, which was about the sustainable procurement and also our initiatives for the shovel ready. JP, do you want to speak to that?
Your Worship, I think the questionnaire related to views around the CIP projects, which is the shovel ready projects.
Yes.
I suppose probably the best thing for us to do is just to hold that any questions related to those projects or the validity of those projects until we get to that item.
Yes, that's my view, Councillor McPherson. When we're at that item, that tended to be the tenor of your questions. You, along with others, have the same opportunity to raise questions, and we all have the same amount of time. This is not a submission process. So, Councillor Kai Fong.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question, JP, just around the rates relief. We had targeted some specific sectors and the criteria for that. Is that going to be reviewed and widened, given that, you know, we're now another month on and businesses will now have maybe a better idea of their cash flow position?
Councillor, I think the key here, and I hope Thomas is on the line too, because I think we raised, and when we've discussed this in the forum, that obviously it's there's a view that we need to look at the impacts being experienced by all businesses and all households. So again, that's something that Thomas will have to reflect in that consideration of how the targeting is undertaken. So I don't know if Thomas needs to add anything else to that. I'll just leave it open at that point for him to answer off anything more.
I do think, Councillor Kaifong, that's 8.4, which is when we are discussing the annual plan. So if we could leave it till then and wrap it into there, because Thomas will be presenting part of that. So I think your questions will be answered. Are there any other questions on that presentation from JP? No? Right, thank you. And now, JP, you're moving on to the a mover and a seconder for the motion, the report on Crown Infrastructure Partners Projects Economic Stimulus Potential, submitted by the Rotorua Lakes Council. Do I have a mover?
Dave Donaldson, and seconded by Fisher Wang.
Thank you. Right, over to you again. This is a bit like the JP show. We did say that, but these have been put together by quite a considerable process. JP.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillors, this report is intended really just to get on the record for you the projects that were submitted around the Crown Infrastructure Partners program. So if you recall, we signalled on the 3rd of April that one of the actions we needed to look at was there had been the letter received by all territorial local authorities asking for them to submit projects which were shovel ready so that the government could consider those in a very quick time. So the issue we've had there, of course, is that they were due on the 14th of April. So we have submitted those projects. Now, councillors, you'll be aware, and we've signalled this or repeated it in the forum we had last week. One of the key criteria was the need for these projects to be capable of being started within 6 to 12 months. So the shovel ready status was really important. So the government was trying extremely hard to make sure that if they were to fund any particular projects, that stimulus would arrive quickly into their local economies when that support was needed most. They did not want to see projects that had a long lag or lead-in time, because that really reduces their effectiveness in providing that economic stimulus to the country and certainly into the regions or localities. And that was certainly one of the key sets of learnings that have come out of a lot of papers and a lot of research done after the global financial crisis, that a lot of the stimulus initiatives were too late in arriving and recoveries were well underway. So we've been quite hard in looking at the projects that we had which were potentially shovel ready. We grouped them under two key themes, councillors. So, you know, we've had a lot of focus on the housing and thriving communities priority for this coming term. So we wanted to stay firmly focused in that space as well. So we grouped them under two key themes. One was infrastructure to support housing and the development of new businesses and sectors. And a second theme was leveraging existing tourism investment to create greater value and strengthen that domestic visitation. So those were the key focus of the projects that we set forward. So based on that, councillors, we put forward 7 projects. The first of those was some investment on Tinai Road, which would enable residential development, but also enable development at Eastgate and at the airport. So 2 sort of light industrial, light commercial development areas, as well as substantial residential development capacity. So that was part of our housing and thriving community strategy. In addition to the roading interventions was the need for us to see investment in those areas in stormwater. So as we've told you before, there is considerable challenges in managing stormwater. Our network is designed to a certain capacity, and as we go further up the caldera and the impacts of climate change mean that our stormwater interventions in any new residential or greenfield developments get significantly larger, and it's become quite a barrier for development. So there was an opportunity for us to put that forward since we had begun the master planning for the stormwater catchments on both the east and the west side of the city. Wastewater treatment plant, it's been in our long-term plan for a while, the upgrades, so that's really important for lifting the capacity, so to support that growth, but also to improve water quality of the recovered water from the wastewater treatment plant. You've been aware, and Mark Gibb, the airport chief executive, has reported several times about the longer term development aspirations for the airport captured in their master plan. So they've put forward an application around the development of Precinct A and Precinct B. So one specifically around hangars and private air type services, and a second precinct area which has a whole bunch of ancillary service capacity within the airport precinct. So really important development for the airport. And the final one in that housing and development area for growth was also enhancements to the sewage reticulation at Rotorua. So that was a particularly important project for that community as well. So when we look at the opportunity around leveraging existing tourism investment or creating greater value domestically, again, this is a focus on ensuring that we had things that could be or were shovel ready. The Aquatic Centre plan, so councillors had been shown the $25 million development master plan for the Aquatic Centre, of which council had committed its $7.5 million to do the first stage of those. So there was a significant opportunity to enhance what is a regionally important facility still further, so the Aquatic Centre. In addition, forest development, so there'd been a significant amount of work done around what was to be iwi investment opportunities on Hub 2, but also further enhancement of the offerings within the forest and wider community, particularly around walking, running and mountain biking. And obviously the last one there was the Rotorua lakefront development. So a significant part of the investments intended for the lakefront were around the commercial investment footprint and also the redevelopment of the commercial jetties. So this was an opportunity to say, look, for those tourism businesses operating there and potential future development, they had been set back significantly, as the tourism industry. So here was an opportunity to seek some funding to support those investments as well. And the last one, which we had submitted on behalf of TPK, was some further investment in Kaingaroa Village. So a mix of interventions for Kaingaroa, so some hard infrastructure, so roading, water supplies and lighting, as well as some softer infrastructure around improving homes and home insulation, but also playground developments and some support for the school. So a range of projects in there. So the total for all of those applications was just under 210 million if they were to be funded 100% by government. So that's the 7 or 8 projects that had been submitted by the Rotorua Lakes Council. In addition, and I've signalled it in the paper, councillors, there had been separate conversations with NZTA requesting a view of what other roading projects could be fast-tracked or given an additional investment to support our community. So there was an additional sort of $40-odd million worth of projects there. And separate to that, and it's picked up on page 35, councillors, is those other projects which have been considered or are in process of being developed by government locally. So courthouse redevelopment, the forestry ministry at the Sion campus, and as well as DHB investment in mental health facilities. So a range of projects that the government could consider to support that local stimulus in the short term.
Thank you, JP. And those are certainly the subject of our workshop last week. I just want to note too the timing that you mentioned. request on the 3rd of April and to be submitted by the 14th of April. So this was a very nimble and had to be rapid response. And it was an issue discussed by the mayors of the region, and it wasn't about pulling forward everything in our long-term plan and putting it into the shovel-ready projects. It was to be measured to be shovel-ready, so the business case built up, and something that had gone out in our annual plans and discussion in our long-term plan. So well pulled together. And can I just congratulate you for actually getting the list together that reflected a broad spread. But there will be questions, and I'll take them as they arise, and every member gets the opportunity to ask a question, and they should be questions that are related to the shovel ready at this stage. Councillor Rokawa Tate.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, JP. You know, Madam Chair, it was a very, very big ask by the government to give us, 7 days to get these projects into them to consider. So at least we were able to respond, but sometimes I think the central government is somewhat unreasonable in their demands. Can I just say, I just want to ask, ideally, obviously, we would like to have these 100% funded, coming to $209 million. My question to JP, Your Worship, is if we do not get these projects, or a number of them, well, all of them ideally, 100% funded, will we be prioritising some and say, well, these ones we must get done irrespective of? Are we going to be ranking some of these? Thank you, Madam Chair.
So JP, that question is, what do we do with those that are not considered favourably? And the fund has been completely oversubscribed by regional council and local authorities around the country. So, you know, this will be one that you will be lucky to get everything that was on that list. But JP, do you want to answer that, please?
It's a very good question, Councillor, and it's an important one. I think one of the things that we're likely to see is once the government has done some form of evaluation, and I understand that all of the projects that were submitted by local government and have been fired out to the various departments and ministries for consideration, is that at some point we'll be approached with some sort of picture of what they think are valid projects that they'd like to explore with us. And I think the question that Councillor Rokawa Tate raised was that may involve a 100% grant, it may involve a partial grant, or it may involve a loan. So there's a number of mechanisms the government may come back to us. So at that point, and I think this is the important part of us having submitted these projects, that information will have to be presented to you as our elected members for you to consider whether that kind of partnership or that kind of investment is valid before we can progress it. So, you know, you've seen that with how we submitted on Provincial Growth Fund projects, councillors. We put forward an application. They've come back and said, well, here's the level of funding we're proposing, and these are the conditions. So you'd have to look hard at what those projects were and consider whether they were still valid and it was appropriate for us to enter into a contract or an arrangement with government to progress those. I think your other question then is, what about the rest of the projects? One of the things I think we need to talk about, and we've raised it in the guiding strategies around this coming annual plan, is making sure we have some capacity within our capital expenditure program for this coming year, that if these projects are partly funded or are considered important by you, that you have the ability to consider how you progress them anyway. So I think that's the flexibility we need to carry into this coming annual plan. But also gives you the opportunity to make some key decisions about what partnerships you want to enter into with government around potentially these projects.
Thank you. And now we have Councillor Dave Donaldson, then followed by Councillor McPherson and Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, JP, I think you partially answered my question in responding to Councillor Rokawa Tate. And it was just the clarity around council's exposure to any of these projects. And for example, the Kaingaroa Village one is just submitted on behalf and wouldn't even be for assets on council land. So there's no implications, cost implications for council with that one. And likewise, my understanding is that the additional funding at Forest Hub 2 in the lakefront is not matched funding. Could you clarify that, because the media release that Councillor McPherson's referring to, it doesn't make that clear. It tends to suggest that this is extra matched funding and investment by council. That's the way it read to me. So could we have clarity on that? Thank you.
Councillor, I suppose I probably wasn't as explicit in answering Councillor Okawa Tate's question, which is you have no decisions as yet on the table with no offer by council through this process of match funding. So at the moment, we are asking for 100% funding of these items. If the government comes back and says we're willing to put forward some of this funding, we would have to enter into a negotiation, and that would have to be signed off by council. If any council funding was allocated to them, I think the other opportunity that still exists for both the forest and the lakefront projects is there is still the private investment opportunities that also need to be explored within that context as well. So at this stage, there is no council match funding on the table at all.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Earlier you indicated that you prefer that people keep their comments and questions extremely short. Fair enough. In the light of the...
No, you're welcome to ask. You have your time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. The RDR's evaluation has been with all councillors since the 27th of April. I know that some of the arguments in there will be contested and run counter to the preferences and the approach that's been enunciated by John Paul. And thank you, John Paul, for such hard work over a short period of time. I understand how difficult that challenge would have been. But nevertheless, there are these particular views from our evaluation. I say it's ours because it represents the views of many ratepayers, the ones we represent. But it's going to be impossible for us to consider the objections to each of the projects and the strengths that are recognised in many of the proposals here today. So therefore, I think, could I suggest the most sensible thing to do will be to attach as an appendix to the minutes of this meeting this feedback from RDRR. Thank you.
Councillor McPherson, I repeat, this isn't an opportunity for submitting on behalf of the community. That's when we go out with the annual plan and the long-term plan. As democratically elected members, we are asked today to look at the list that has already gone forward because of the timing. I might ask you to clarify what is the priority in a rather long list of objections that you put forward. What is your priority? And we only received it on the 29th.
Right, I'm sorry there was a delay in the receipt of it. I'll quickly summarise then. The land development bid is strongly supported. We've got to sort out Tenai Road and the development so that maybe Whakabi can press ahead. The wastewater treatment plant is also crucial to get the water quality targets and to meet the growing demand, but would have to take out international tourist projections. And at the moment, it doesn't include the cost of an acceptable discharge solution. The Kaingaroa Village plan, the Rotorua connection, and the Aquatic Centre to a degree, very supportive of. The airport bid, however, and the Forest Hub 2 and the lakefront redevelopment, in our view, those projects have become virtually redundant because of the collapse in international demand for tourism. And to put good money after bad would be to complete white elephants. So we would urge people not to support those last three projects. And by the way,
I accept your view there. It's rather damaging when we're going to the Crown for funding to hear that there's a group that say this is counterfactual to investing in our recovery. So we've got to be very cautious about how we use our words so that it is seen that the majority of us support these. You're welcome to have that view.
Yes, well, I'll wind things up then by simply saying these are our views, our strong views of the people we represent, and I'm glad that everybody has read our feedback, but we would like it noted that there is this internal concern about some of the projects, and we understand the need for haste. All those things are self-evident, but that's not a reason for not hearing what we have to say. So thank you for hearing our concerns.
Thank you. And I do have to add there, it's rather a shame as well that we haven't had Councillor Kumar at any of our workshops or our previous council meeting where these have been discussed, but we understand his service to the community. Councillor Maxwell?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Okay, first of all from me, thank you, JP. On the 3rd of April, yes, you brought forward many of these 8 projects and asked and indicated what you're going to be working on, and we did vote on that, and there was a division, and there was only Councillor McPherson against it. So I'm pleased that you have worked hard to get it done by the 14th of April to get it down to government, and hence one of the reasons I don't want anything attached to our CIP projects, because it'll just muddy the waters. For me, thank you, JP, outlining all that mahi that needs to be done out at the west there with, I think, about 2,500 possible sections homes. And the airport hangars, Rotary, the Aquatic Centre, and Kaingaroa, and those projects totaling up to $210 million. I hope that the government sees merit in what we're putting forward in that here. I'd like to ask a question, JP, on the one which is on page 40, which is the wastewater treatment plant, which is some 30 years old now. We did a tour there just after the election on one of our bus tours and everything. And we've had a rōpū working on this since 2015. And they put up a proposal saying that for it to be upgraded, it'll give us a 50-year horizon, which how long can something as important as that not be done or shelved or on the table, JP?
JP, are you able to respond to the wastewater treatment upgrade?
Yes, I am, Your Worship. And I think we've had it programmed, councillors, for quite some time. And Councillor Donaldson will particularly remember the undertaking that we've given to CNI around coming out of the forest. So we actually merged both parts, the upgrade of the wastewater treatment plant with the future disposal options. So this actually pulls them back apart and just talks to the investment in the wastewater treatment plant itself. So it is programmed within our long-term plan, and it is a critical set of upgrades that will lift the standard of the treatment still further, and is very important also to create the capacity for the wastewater treatment plant to deal with growth and further reticulation across the city and across the district. So an important investment that is programmed within our long-term plan, and as I say, we've separated it from the disposal method.
Thank you.
Your Worship.
Thank you, Madam.
Councillor
Thank you, Madam.
Maxwell?
Thank
And
you,
then
Madam
Councillor
Mayor.
Wang. Yes.
I'd like to speak in support of this actually, and firstly thank the staff who have managed to pull this together in a short time, and just remind everyone that none of these projects are new. A lot of them have been on the books for a very long time, and I only wish if our former colleague Councillor Charles Sturt could have been here to see that we could potentially finally have that roundabout in Wongataha. So I support it because it has been on our books, but also aligns with the priorities that this council set for this term that we're in. So the questions that I have, first of all, is just on who will own these assets. Now I know it will be 100% hopefully funded by government, but will they be invested in council to own? The second question is, can we prioritise local contractors? Of that 200 million, I would really love to see a lot of that going into our local businesses and contractors to build this infrastructure for us. And the third question is just around the rural communities. I'm really pleased that we were able to support Kaingaroa. You know how strongly I feel about supporting that community, but just wanted to share that there was some disappointment from the rural community, particularly Mamaku, who have had a development plan since 2001 that has unfortunately been on our waiting list on council. So while I fully support the projects that we have in place, I just hope that we can still remember and hopefully find some place in our annual plan or long-term plan to support our wider rural communities as well.
Thank you.
Just going through those responses, Councillor, we don't know who the assets would be vested in at this stage or who would be the owners. If you take the assumption that this would be a grant for some of these works to council to undertake, then council would be the owner of those assets. If we end up with a situation where there's a part funding model, there is a potential that we would still own the assets. But again, this would be part of those negotiations that would need to be undertaken. I think for government, they're always acutely aware, and it has been part of that process through the Provincial Growth Fund, of if you receive a grant, what and how are you going to manage the life of those assets once they're completed. So really important that we have a life cycle view of that, and generally that means ownership by a local authority so that they can be maintained for their relevant lifespan. The second part was making sure that we try and make sure there's a significant amount of value retained in our local community from the stimulus projects. That is one of the reasons why we've brought up the sustainable procurement and the sort of the local focus on this agenda, just to talk about some of the initiatives we're immediately taking to try and make sure our expenditure and potential future stimulus expenditure is kept as tightly within our community and realises the maximum benefit for our community. So that's really important. The other part, and you've raised a really good question, was it was very difficult for us to put together this list of projects. And again, we've talked about making sure they were shovel ready, but equally, we wanted to stay tight and focused in what we asked the government to support us with. Now, if they come back and fund a number of these projects, there'll be projects, particularly the wastewater treatment plant, that we had expected to fund ourselves fully.
Yep.
So I think the important thing for us as a local community is actually that creates some funding headroom for the council. So that might give us the opportunity to look more widely at the other projects we would like to do and make sure there is actually some value provided to all parts of our district from that investment. So hopefully that gives groups like Mamaku or the rural community an opportunity to see actually some spillover benefits from a central funding of a particularly large project, that it gives council some flexibility to consider some other wider projects that may not have been on our priority list at the time. Councillors, Your Worship, I don't know if we're quite there yet, but I'd love to just talk a bit more about the tourism sector. Because there's been a lot of criticism about the future of tourism, and I'd very much like to just talk about why it is such an important sector for us. So if at some point, could I come back around to that?
Yes, certainly. Now we have another question from Councillor Wang, and then Jeff would like to add something. So Councillor Wang first.
Sure, Madam Mayor, thank you. Tanya's asked a few of my questions, so I'll just totally support her comments there. regarding the support of our local contractors, because we want that money to be circulated and stay in our local community, to be circulated in our community. It's really good to see the wastewater treatment plant upgrade is on the list, because if for another weather event such as a big flooding to happen, it's not a matter of if, but it's when. This will ensure that our community is in a place where we will be able to deal with a situation like that and not have any disasters happen with our natural environment. And it's really good to see that Kaingaroa is on there, and it would have been good to see some more rural, input into this as well. But I'm really happy to see that we'll be unlocking some land development as well, so that we're continuing investing and unlocking the community benefits. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, you wish to add something?
Look, thank you, Your Worship. Look, I just want to emphasise a couple of things that JP has already covered off. But the first one is the intent of government for calling for these projects. And that was to get money back into our economy. And first and foremost, that is the intent. Why is that important? Well, fundamentally, by getting money through these sort of projects back into the economy, it immediately creates employment. It creates immediate employment for local contractors, local companies, as well as companies working in Rotorua. So if we can bring forward and start the build of the wastewater treatment plant more quickly, that gets people immediately into jobs. That's fundamentally the intent of government here. Secondly, from a council perspective, it brings forward community projects which have immediate value. So the Aquatic Centre, as an example, will be something at some point in the future council will invest in. But this investment from central government effectively means that we're able to accelerate the creation of that value through the Aquatic Centre at a time when we wouldn't necessarily ourselves be able to actually invest in it to that level. Thirdly, not only does it create community value more quickly, but it also, if you like, from a council perspective, creates a level of headroom that we have available to spend that otherwise we wouldn't have. If government takes off our need to build a wastewater treatment plant, there's $60 million effectively potentially available for other projects that you may want to consider in the future that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to actually necessarily look at. And I think that shouldn't be lost. Lastly, though, I'd like JP just to explore a little bit more about why another type of set of projects were put in. And those are projects where, for example, on the lakefront or Forest Hub 2 or for the airport, we're not investing in public infrastructure or putting forward public infrastructure investments. We're putting forward investments which would result in commercial activity. And just like JP, just to really explore why were those projects selected, what is the rationale for that investment, and how would that create value for our community?
Right, and then JP, I'll get you to answer those, and then there still are some questions, and I'm going to ask all councillors. JP.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I think that the issue Jeff raised there is part of what I wanted to talk about with tourism in general. So some of the investment we're talking about here, it's not, and so we've concentrated on a discussion that says, what is shovel ready and what will government's money support in the way of contractors and tradies and allied suppliers during the construction of those projects. So that's really important. And so obviously the wastewater treatment plant is one of those areas. But the other projects we've put forward, and we've identified that the lakefront and the forest has another opportunity, which is the businesses that come along after that.
Yep.
and either expand or establish or grow. So those are really important. So if we start talking about both the lakefront and the forest projects, you know, you get obviously the stimulation from the build, but that actually also opens up the opportunity with those particular projects to see a new cafe or a restaurant developed, expansion of bike hire or shuttle services. You know, there's a number of businesses that come along after the construction phase or can grow on the back of those. So that was another really important opportunity for us. And it applies equally for the airport development. So one of the limitations that Rotorua currently has is the availability of the appropriate commercial industrial land for new developments. So we have got a limitation there for new businesses to relocate. So again, this is an opportunity to obviously get the value out of the construction, but equally to see the opportunity there that a new business may move to Rotorua and establish itself, or an existing business may move and free up another place or add additional investment. So all of these opportunities in some of these projects actually add additional value past the construction phase. And I think that was the key perspective that the Chief Executive was putting forward. Now, can I just go back again to the tourism question? So on the 3rd of April, councillors, you agreed that one of those strategies was position Rotorua as leading the resurgence of tourism and wood processing. So 2 really important planks. And the reason why both the lakefront and the forest projects were put forward in that space, and I think this is important for us to get this information back out to our wider community and our ratepayers so they understand the importance of the tourism sector. Obviously some do. That might be some of the 20+% of people employed within the tourism sector. So it's incredibly important to our local economy, to our paid employees out in the community, and obviously the households they live in. So the jobs in tourism are very important here in Rotorua. So obviously it's taken a significant hit from COVID-19, far worse than probably a number of other business sectors, and it's likely to be affected far longer than a lot of the other business sectors. So that is particularly damaging to the hundreds of businesses we have in Rotorua in the tourism sector, and the thousands of people who are employed within the tourism sector. So if we are to recover, and if we are to recover and build back better, the tourism sector is still critical to our future and our future development. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of things, because everyone assumes that with the removal of international, that is the end of tourism in Rotorua. Now, that's not correct. However, some businesses rely heavily or almost exclusively on international visitors. They will be devastated. But 59% of the expenditure from visitors in Rotorua, based on last year's figures, came from domestic visitors. Yeah. So we have approximately 60% of the visitor expenditure in Rotorua in the last financial year came from domestic visitors. 2/3 of that domestic visitation comes from Auckland, Waikato, and the Bay of Plenty. So our immediate drive visitors are an important platform for which we need to build our recovery. Our domestic recovery has got to be our first focus. So when you think about that, that's our total expenditure was $845 million last year, provided by visitors to Rotorua. 499 million of that came from domestic visitors. Now, I've talked about 2/3 of it coming from those immediately around us. So Rotorua will continue to be an important domestic visitation location. So we need to build on that to support the recovery of our tourism sector. So some of the other things that are being talked about is also the chance potentially for Australia and New Zealand to form their own tourism bubble. whilst the rest of the world continues to suffer. So when I go back to last year's figures, $346 million of that 845 came from internationals. Now, just over 20% of that, which is about $72 million, came from Australians. So again, our platform to build back a recovery in the tourism sector needs to importantly focus on domestic, but we also have the opportunity to see reasonably quickly a return of international visitors from Australia at least. So there is an opportunity for us to see that growth there quite importantly. That's still a huge hit to our visitor spend from last year, but it's a basis on which we can build back with a focus on that domestic tourism. So again, we've just completed over the summer the latest updates of the mountain biking work that was done about 3 years ago. So if I just give you some figures there, only about 20% of those people who were accessing the forest for mountain biking were internationals. Some of the economic impacts that we received, and was in the analysis of the previous report, said most of the 30 to 47 million value that mountain biking creates for Rotorua, about 60 to 65% of that was from domestic spend. So when we think about those people who are coming to Rotorua domestically, they're coming here for our lakes, for our forest, for our mountain biking, and obviously the other natural and cultural opportunities that are here. So we have a really important opportunity. So mountain biking and the forest and the trails and the facilities we're developing there are strongly favoured by our domestic visitors. So just giving you some of those latest figures. So last year, at the two counterpoints, we had just under 200,000 people going through the key counterpoints over back in 17-18 when we did the first survey. The work that was completed just over the summer has now seen an increase to something like 254,000. So about a 25% increase since those figures were last recorded for mountain biking visits. So again, we're seeing also increases in the walkers and over a particular 3-month period at the eastern end of Lake Tikitapu, there's been over 35,000 walkers through that space. So people coming here to enjoy our community from a domestic tourism perspective is hugely important to us. And a really good platform for a recovery. So as I say, it's something that I think we just need to make sure that people are aware of, that we're very lucky in Rotorua. We've got 3 very strong sectors: tourism, forestry, and obviously the agricultural and farming sectors. But obviously this has damaged that tourism sector harder and probably for longer than some of those other affected areas of our economy. But equally, the opportunity for us to build back stronger on what is a solid base of domestic visitation is really important to us.
Thank you. And we've got 2 more sets of questions, one from Sandra Kaifong and one from, Councillor Kaifong and Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Not so much questions, just some comments. I support what Councillor Okawa-Tate said around a debate, and that will still to come depending on what projects are funded. So looking forward to that debate. I support the projects that have been put forward. I think that this is actually an opportunity for us to get some free money if we can, and to use this opportunity to either get fit or to get fat. And we can either sit on the couch and do nothing, or we can use this opportunity to get fit and be ready for when things take off again. And I think that, we can't look into a crystal ball and say that tourism is actually dead. We don't know that. So, we've got to use the opportunity to take time to get ready for when things get going again. I like the diversification of the projects that we're covering off not only core infrastructure, but we're also looking at, rebuilding that tourism sector. But also, these assets are not just for tourists. What we're doing, particularly with, the Aquatic Centre, the forestry project and the lakefront, is actually rebuilding community facilities for families, for us to make a livable community. So I like that. And I think that, you know, we haven't strayed or had a knee-jerk reaction in trying to find projects. We've stuck to our knitting, we've stuck to the vision, we've stuck to the projects that we've said that we were supporting. So my comments.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
Kia ora, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Kaifong. I didn't actually have questions either. I had some comments that I wanted to make, and between Councillor Kaifong, Councillor Tapsell, as well as JP, I think you've covered them off, because one of my biggest comments was around the fact that, as last week we heard in our workshop from John McRae, as well as Michelle Templer, the domestic expenditure. So I believe I support the projects that have been put before us, because I also feel and believe that they will create a livable community. It's about seizing the opportunity that's before us and capitalising on the expediency. So hopefully government will work in our favour, and we'll be able to have, as Councillor Kaifong mentioned, some free money to support our communities. So kia ora noi ho tāku.
Thank you. And now I'm going to ask some who haven't taken an opportunity. Councillor Bentley, you haven't had a chance to ask a question or speak. Do you wish to add something?
Not at this stage, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Well, I want to say something, and I want to say to JP and the team and those that work in partnership with us, Te Tata o Te Arawa and our community and our lakes board, this is a very good list that's gone forward. We didn't overextend, we just didn't dump everything in it. We pulled things forward that are going to really help us on our recovery path, and I'm very proud of that. I was also proud at the meeting of the mayors around the region when Minister Jones spoke, and there is an acknowledgement that Rotorua does things differently and does things in partnership. And so iwi have been involved in building so many of these projects together with us that we've put before government, and they want to see that skin in the game and that right relationship that's there. I also want to just mention Tarawera. I know we jumped to some of those others that didn't get in. Tarawera's not lost, it's just we've got to find the right solution there with the communities of interest around Tarawera for their scheme there and their aspirations. They feel that they've lost their way, but they haven't at all. It's just working to find that solution. I do want to pick up too on Ganesh Nana when he spoke to us, also with Peter Rice in our workshop. And I was incredibly impressed about them saying, you've got to have a plan, you've got to have leadership, you've got to be bold, and you've got to move nimbly and work well together. And that's what we are able to do in Rotorua like none other. I've been incredibly impressed by the Te Arawa response, not only the response to welfare, but also their response to looking at an economic recovery focus and working alongside of us in with RED. So we're very well poised. I think these are, it would be wonderful if we got 2/3 of what we've submitted forward. But I do know that government knows we don't put things together and put them forward unless there's a strong business case beside them with the support of our community. So I don't have questions to ask. I am very concerned about the hit in our community. It's devastating. The impact on tourism and hospitality for us all is absolutely devastating. And the opportunity that I see is the spend of New Zealanders internationally that now can come back to domestic tourism. It's an enormous yield, and we need to be very well positioned. And that's why I like these projects in here, because it positions us for the growth of domestic tourism and then ultimately, hopefully, trans-Tasman or international. So well done. Now I'm going to put the motion to the vote. I need a mover.
Madam Mayor, Councillor Donaldson does have his hand up.
Sorry, Councillor Donaldson, you get another bite of the cherry. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I thought we'd just finish questions and we're going to have a whip round, and I think I already have moved, Una, if I'm correct. Yes. I have moved, and correct, so Dave. As the mover, I'd like to have a couple of comments, if I might. And look, I applaud all the councillors who have supported the projects that they have. I just want to speak about the importance of Rotorua Lakes Council showing or instilling confidence in central government that we're fully behind this list that we've put forward. And the suggestion's been made that because tourism is flatlined, we should mothball those projects. Pretty much, I'm not in the position of saying to the 11,000 in our community, 23% of our workforce who work in tourism and hospitality and events, that you're dead to us. Those projects should be at the top of the list in my view. And so, you know, for that reason, I absolutely support the list that has gone forward. I think it's important that we as a council stand behind this list. I couldn't agree more. The wastewater treatment plant, it is, as Stavros has said, beyond its design life, but I think we're united 100% in supporting that upgrade. And the matter of the land disposal system, well, that's in the Environment Court, and there'll be a decision at some point when the court gets back on whether that's added in. I'm not quite sure if that's factored into the full cost of the project as submitted to the government for the shovel-ready projects. But let's just wait and see what comes out of government decision-making. But I think we grab everything we can. And as Councillor Tapsell has said earlier, we need to go harder to get our economy up and running again. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a mover and a seconder. I'm going to put the motion that the report, Crown Infrastructure Partners Projects Economic Stimulus Potential, submitted by the Rotorua Lakes Council, be received. All those in favour, please raise your right hand.
That is carried.
It's carried. Thank you. Right, we move now to, does anyone want their...
Yes, please.
Yes, please, to what? You are supporting?
No, I would like my objections. Sorry, I wish to vote against this, and I'd like that recorded. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, that's passed. We move now to, and could I thank all councillors? I think this is unprecedented, and we need to move really fast, and well done, council, for putting that together with us after our workshops. Right, we move now to 8.2, recommendation 2, sustainable procurement in the COVID-19 recovery program. Do I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report, sustainable procurement and the COVID-19 recovery program be received? Do I have a mover?
Moved. Yeah, moved by Councillor Rakawa Tate and seconded by Councillor Yates.
Thank you. Now we're going to have a presentation, and poor JP, I hope he's had someone bring in a cup of tea for him.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, can I just interrupt? So we've had the mover and the seconder to receive it.
Would you like to put that? Yes. All those in favour, please say aye. Raise your right hand.
Thank you. That's carried.
Thank you. Now, JP, are you ready to present again? And I understand that, Thomas, you're going to come in on this one.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, Thomas and I can do this as a double act. But basically, what you've got before you, councillors, is just us seeking your endorsement of some immediate actions we've started to take in regard to procurement, and obviously also signal that we're taking a longer term view of creating a more substantial set of changes to our procurement manuals and procurement documents to take more of a sustainable approach to procurement decisions going forward. So the second part, councillors, just starting with that, will require us to bring back some additional policies for you to review and to consider. We've signalled in the past that the government has set out some new guidelines, and those are particularly clear in what they've given us as a way of contract conditions around the provincial growth funds. So that's our benchmark at the moment, where they're wanting to understand what are the knock-on effects or value-add effects from local procurement, where do they see improvements in some of the social outcomes. So that's quite an important part of what the government's been asking us to do as part of our monitoring of our projects around the Provincial Growth Fund. So this is a direction being set by government, and we're moving to make sure that's enshrined in our key documents and key policies. When I go back to the first part, councillors, obviously we've been taking some immediate decisions to improve the weighting or the ability for local businesses to win work with the council. So being acutely aware of making sure that we're getting the best price possible, but we've been putting in place a number of other sort of incentives, supports, encouragements to make sure that local contractors and businesses have a better than average opportunity to make sure they can acquire some work from us to make sure our expenditure stays in our local economy and it supports local jobs and local families. So really important decision making. So councillors, they're not seen as, if you look at that recommendation under 2, there's 4 bullet points. They don't all run at the same time. So Thomas's project management office and his procurement team, when they're talking about the pieces of work that need to go out for tender or for contracts, they look carefully at what are the opportunities for us to make sure we're supporting those local businesses. So sometimes that might simply mean a changing of the weighting that's given to local impacts or local broader outcomes, or it might mean that we actually write within our tender documents that it's only available to businesses that have an office here. Or we go further and say, actually, this is only to those who are invited to tender. So we may go through and select individual businesses to say, look, we would like 5 businesses to tender for this piece of work, and you are one of the 5. So there's a number of strategies we're applying immediately to ensure we support our local businesses as much as we can during COVID-19. So just by way of an example, one of the ones that has gone out recently is the tender or request for proposals around the development or redevelopment of the visitor centre. So that is one of our Provincial Growth Fund projects. So what's been asked for there is a consortium between architects and designers and a local construction companies. Now that has only been put out to our local architects to partner with a local construction company to undertake that proposal and potentially to win that significant piece of work locally. So I'll stop at that point because you've probably already got sick of listening to me, and I'll hand across to Thomas to see if he'd like to add anything.
So Thomas.
I think you explained everything, JP, but happy to participate in any answers, questions.
Right, so we need a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Do I have a
Madam Mayor, you've already had that. So you've had a mover and a seconder.
Oh, sorry, so we have 2. So now open for questions. There are no, oh, yes, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. Just a question on the way in which the criteria are going to be applied. I noticed the phrase significantly increase the weighting. What precisely is meant by significantly? My concern about this is that that technique and another technique of confining bids by inviting tenders does open the door to the possibility of nepotism. and even the perception of nepotism has to be avoided. And the third concern is that the tendering process itself is important, not so much for the outcomes, but for the way it signals wrong. It provides accurate price signals of what the market is sustaining. So those are the three questions that either Thomas or Jean-Paul might care to address. Thank you.
Councillor McPherson, I'm ruling out of order your comment about nepotism. We've had a very thorough process of procurement in the past, and there has never been evidence of nepotism. So I rule that out. But Thomas or JP, would you like to answer, please, the other aspects?
I'm happy to start off. First of all, just supporting your nepotism comment there, Your Worship. Rest assured to the community that our procurement practices are such, and ensuring that conflict of interest are declared, that nepotism doesn't and can't take place in our procurement processes.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure that the word is actually applicable to what the councillor was meaning. With regards to the word significant change to the weighting, I think in the past what we have seen is the circumstances where we obviously have the 5% threshold to ensure that if a price is within 5% and there's a difference between a local and a non-local business, that we would select the local one. With regards to the weighting, what we are seeing in some of our procurement strategies is that there's also not only on price, but generally we've had a 10 to 15% on average weighting in tenders, and what we've now seen is that's shifting to more 20 to 30% as the total scoring system of when we are evaluating tenders. So hopefully that puts a bit of context around what we're seeing with the word significant. We're not seeing a massive increase to such levels like 50, 60 or 70% of the weighting. And sorry, Your Worship, I missed the third question.
Councillor McPherson, do you want to repeat your third question?
I've been muted.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Thank you. I was muted. First, I had a point of order objecting to the extrapolation of my comments about opening the door to nepotism. That was to indicate a future possible case that should be avoided. It didn't reflect on...
Councillor McPherson, I've ruled it out of order.
And I think
you mustn't use inflammatory comments.
I think you're missing my point. To move back to the question from Thomas, the importance, one aspect, the importance of external bids is they give you accurate price signals. And that's an important process, an important outcome of any tendering process.
Can you answer that, please, Thomas?
Correct, and all tenders are from externals, whether they are local or non-local. So I'm not sure exactly what you mean there, Councillor.
It was the possibility of discouraging external bids as a result of a declared policy of almost, not quite, but getting close to locals first.
Oh, so you're meaning externals as in people that aren't from the Rotorua district?
Yes.
Wider, yeah.
That's something that needs to be weighed up, and obviously there are circumstances where we can't go local. So if locals don't have the expertise or aren't in the price range that is acceptable to us, then we would look to go outside of the region as well. But predominantly the strategy should be to support our locals first.
Thank you. Now Councillor Kai Fong, followed by Councillor Rotorua, then Councillor Tapsell, and then Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of comments just around that point about requiring tender participants to have a local office, rather than necessarily having a local office, but to get confirmation from them that even if they are having an Auckland office or somewhere else, that they're actually employing locals, and that should be the key determinant, as opposed to, they could just have lip service and have desk here, but we actually want the jobs to be with local people, and I think that's a weighting factor. Is there consideration to severing parts of contracts when they're being let, so that if some of the larger contracts are too big for Rotorua firms who don't have the capability across a wide range of skills, if the contracts were severed into smaller bits, then that gives a better opportunity for Rotorua businesses to be able to tender competitively?
Thomas?
Yes, a very good question, Councillor. And I'll just give you an example of how we're dealing with that. So post the lockdown, we were looking at putting the next stage of the contract out for the museum, and what it recognised as well that for that size of work, there were a significant number of subcontractors that would obviously support the head contractor. And the discussions with the project manager were of such that what we were looking to do was create a panel of subcontractors that could be chosen from. So we therefore, the head contractor would go out and say, these are all the subcontractors that are interested and these are their prices. And we would look at locality, and therefore we could work with the procurement, the project manager, on ensuring that we could select from that our local contractors over, say, the externals. So good example to show that obviously while there might be opportunities where there's a larger contractor that is looking to subcontract, we can put steps in place to ensure that those subcontractors, we can target locals first.
Thank you. Councillor Rotorua.
No, it's just two more comments.
Oh, sorry.
Just two more comments. One is, please don't forget our InfraCore CCO, because part of their rationale is to have a social good element in terms of the employment of the people there. And last one is just in terms of procurement, can we make sure that we're in line with our economic strategy, which is, we want to support the wood processing industry. So, we should be ensuring that we've got a wood policy and we're procuring wood where we can for use in construction. Thank you.
Thomas, do you want to point take? We never lost our wood first policy. Thank you. Councillor Rotorua.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Over the years, we've looked at our procurement processes, and while I think we have wanted to look at locals, that hasn't always been the case in terms of looking at local contractors and local businesses to provide those services. And I think now, and I have to declare that I've always been in favour of locals first. And when you look at the strategies or the actions here that we're taking, the additional strategies or actions that we're taking, actually they could have been done long ago. It didn't take this crisis to actually give focus to locals first. And so I actually support them, but I'm just rather sorry that these additional strategies weren't put in place prior to this so that our locals would get first option. In some instances, I fully understand that that's not always been possible, but as much as going forward now, as much as possible, I do want to see local contractors and local businesses given every opportunity to come through, not only in a crisis situation. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And then we have Councillor Tapsell, followed by Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Your Worship. The majority of my questions have been answered, so I just have a quick one around the environment. And can I just say how pleased I am to see this really be brought forward. It's definitely been in discussions for a very long time, as many other councillors would know. The question I had around the environment, and I'm on page 54 in the attachment, and just if we could provide some more guidance on how they could be more environmentally friendly, because sometimes for our contractors and our suppliers, when we as council or even the government puts in legislation or policies, it's not always clear how they can proactively do that. So it gets seen as just prohibitive instead of enabling them to do something in a better way. So the question is, in this table, it says, advise how you will consider environmental sustainability and waste management in procurement and practice. I think consider is probably a bit light for what our ambitions are in terms of environment, because consider is just implying, have you thought about it? So maybe, again, coming back to that question, can we perhaps give them a bit more guidance on what we would expect them to do or their practices to be if they were more environmentally friendly?
Thomas, have you got an answer there?
I think I unclicked before Thomas. So, yep. Councillor, the answer is yes. And I'd probably just go one step further in saying that one of the things about moving to more of a sustainable and social procurement focus to what we would be expecting through the tenders process from people putting forward bids for work, is actually working with them to make sure that they have the skills and the guidance and the capacity to look at those things properly. An example is when there was some significant changes in the Health and Safety Act, and council was required to put in place or have our contractors with health and safety plans. The team in Thomas's area did quite a bit of work making sure that our local businesses and particularly the trades had an understanding of what was required. And so there is actually an education and support role that we can put in place to make sure if we propose to bring these things in, that we're actually working with our local suppliers and our local contractors so that they are aware of what they need to do. But if they aren't aware of how to actually put that together, we can help them with that. So that's part of that transition to be, I suppose, a good partner in that process with our local contractors and suppliers.
And I suppose adding to that, JP, does it match what we had outlined in our sustainability strategy? Aye. That'll please Councillor Tapsell. Now, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, all the points that I wanted to question have been raised and answered to my satisfaction. So I'm happy to move 2 and 3 of the recommendation, noting that all of the contracts of any significance will come before council. And at that point, we can probe into the tension between pro-local and any added cost that associates from this change in emphasis in our tender process. So I'm happy to move.
Thank you. Moved. And I'll second and I'll speak to it. I'm pleased that we've increased actually the capacity here for local procurement. That is in support of our localism agenda, which is what local authorities are saying. The right decisions should be made closest to the people that are most impacted on by those decisions. So if we can get that aspect of jobs arising out of it, we can grow our capability locally. So I'm fully supportive, thrilled to hear that you've looked at the visitor centre and the museum as a result of this intended shift. And I think it'll be very well supported by the community. There's a very big move now about act and think locally and buy locally and support localism. So this really reinforces that. I think in the past when we've discussed it, and it was the weighting of local ability to deliver the product, was very much, as you mentioned in your overview, Thomas, it was always about seeking the best price. If we go back to 2013, we were in a parlous state and having to look at growth and also reducing costs. So we had that focus, but it's taken another crisis for us to say, along with central government, that we ought to be doing the local stimuli package. So I'm going to put the motion, there are no more hands up, 2, and that council endorses the current additional pro-local economy actions, including significantly increasing the weighting applied to the local economic impact and broader outcomes attribute, proactively encouraging local councillors to bid, or contractors to bid for projects, using invited tender processes limited to local contractors only, and having open tender processes but requiring participants to have a local office or depot to be considered as conforming, and noting the comments of Councillor Kai Fong, that council supports the development of a wider sustainable procurement framework to underpin council procurement processes, noting that proposed policy changes will be provided to council for sign-off, so they're still to come. All those in favour, oh, they've done it, raise their hand. Against, if you could lower your hand now, anybody against?
Carried.
Carried, well done, and carried unanimously. Right, we move now for those that are watching and the streaming. A couple more issues before we go into our resolution to go into public excluded. So we're moving along well. The recommendation next is 8.3, the local government statement 2019-2022. I want to move it in a seconder to receive the report, local governance statement 2019-2022.
Councillor Rotorua Tate and Councillor Yates.
Thank you. All those in favour? Raise your hand. Right.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. Now, Una, you're going to overview the report for us.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, councillors, this is a piece of work that is required under the Local Government Act, and it requires that the council within 6 months of the elections produces and publishes a local governance statement. The information that is contained in the local governance statement is purely that. It's an information source of all of the council set up and brings together those decisions that you've made around your decision making and your processes following your induction process. And it outlines that framework and that setup for decision making for this current triennium. I don't think it needs any more introduction than that, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Una. So it is a pro forma mechanism that we must sign off. We have a question here from Councillor Tapsell, Councillor McPherson, Councillor Rotorua Tate. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm quite happy with the document, but just wondered whether we could change the cover photo on the cover of it, just given that we don't have a beach in our district. Very happy with everything else.
River Lake. Thank you. Councillor Rotorua Tate, you had your hand up.
Sorry, Your Worship, I forgot to lower it beforehand.
Right. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. Yes, no, just a couple of questions, Una. The first one is, are there any substantive changes since we last saw this? I've not had a chance to read it. That was my concern. And secondly, does it deviate at all from past practice, the past committee structures, particularly in the light of the recent mechanisms we've used for decision making? Thank you.
So your first question, I'm not sure what you mean by deviating from when you last saw it. As I said in my intro, this statement brings together all of the decisions that you have made in those December meetings following your induction program, when you made the decisions about what your committee structure is and the decision-making framework that goes within that. And sorry, can you repeat the second question? Because I didn't quite understand that one either.
No, the first question was about, we formulated a position in December. If there's been no substantive changes to that, I don't have a problem with it. But secondly, in recent times, we've used extraordinary meetings and so on, but these governance principles and practices would not refer to those mechanisms we've used in recent times, I take it.
An extraordinary council meeting can be called at any time for any matters of urgency that are required. And given the unprecedented times that we're in, it has been necessary to call extraordinary council meetings as what we have been doing.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Along with the photo edit requested by Councillor Tapsell, I wonder if we could also add in a photo of the current Te Tato o Te Aroha board. They do sit on our committees and form part of our governance decision-making framework. Thank you.
Thank you. Una, those amendments are perfectly acceptable, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Great. So we've had a mover and a seconder. I'm going to put the motion that the council resolves to approve for public release the Rotorua Lakes Council Local Government Statement 2019. These are responses 2022 as circulated as in a separate document. All those in favour, raise your hand.
And that is carried.
Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Una. That's business as usual and a very tricky time for you to have to put that together. We move now to recommendation 4, 2020-21 annual plan guiding strategies. I need a mover and a seconder that the report 2020-21 annual plan guiding strategies be received. We've got Councillor Rotorua and seconded Councillor Wang. All those in favour, please say aye. Raise your hand. For receiving the report. Thank you.
It's carried.
Right. Now we ask for points of clarification or questions, and JP, you're going to overview the report first.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Councillors, I'm just going to put a slide up in a second, but I thought I'd just start by saying, obviously we've adopted the Build Back Better strategy, but one of the challenges we always have is that once you start trying to align that with our existing planning approach on an annual basis within a context of the long-term plan, we end up with almost a lack of flexibility. So it's important for us just to think about how we're going to support the COVID-19 recovery across the next year or 2 or 3, but also what that means for retaining some flexibility in our decision making as a council. So to be responsive to what is going to come out of those steering groups and sector groups and also Te Arawa, but also to look at any changing circumstances as we see what happens as far as an opening of borders or a further outbreak or change in the current lockdown levels. So councillors, I've just got a slide here now. I think I've shared it now onto the screen for you, or have I not?
Yes, you have.
Okay, so councillors, let me just move some of my own documentation around.
JP, we're only, oh, there we go.
Yeah. Okay, so that's there. So I'm just going to put it up on a full slide just so you're aware of it. So councillors, we talked about this in the forum on the 23rd of April. So on the left-hand side, it's just important to show that we've adopted our strategies around the Rotorua Economic Recovery Plan. So what we will do to recover is sort of focused in there. Now, obviously, that has an implication for our annual plan and our annual plan consultation for this coming year. Now, councillors, you'll be aware that as usual, we've picked up, or before COVID-19, we had picked up year 3 of our long-term plan and had a number of workshops where we looked at what had changed since we did that year 3 of the long-term plan. And of course, that was going to be the basis of our consultation document. So those changes from year 3 for this coming year's annual plan. So obviously we'd spent a number of sessions that had been led by Thomas and Una, working through those issues in a number of forums, and that was building towards setting up that consultation document. Now, obviously, all of that work has gone out the window because of COVID-19. So we don't have the time to reset and go through a number of workshops. So what had been proposed at the forum last week was a number of guiding strategies so that we could go away and reshape the consultation documents, the budgets and the programs for the coming year, and present that back to you for confirmation. So again, we're looking at this session now in this meeting to confirm those strategies. So if I just go through those 8 strategies that we would like signed off to guide the preparation of the new annual plan for the 2021 year, and obviously the consultation document that is associated with it. So if I start and just look at those individual strategies as we've laid out on the screen in front of you. So Councillor Rokawa-Tate asked the question around the cushioning the blow, the rates relief. So one of the things that we wanted to confirm with you as part of this strategy is that we would be looking at carrying forward the decisions we've made around rates relief for this fourth quarter of this financial year into the annual plan for the next financial year. So obviously that has a financial implication for the council, and it's important to recognise that those postponements may affect council's revenue going forward. So one of the strategies we're looking at confirming is that we carry forward the availability of those deferment options. Now clearly we're not going to see the economy bounce back within the next few months. This will be a medium-term recovery for our community and for the businesses and households within our community. So that continuation of that deferment is really important. So the next strategy was a prudent approach to rating. So obviously the intention here of the work we've been doing is how do we achieve the minimum required rates increase whilst looking after council's funding as we move forward. So councillors, as you're aware, through those workshops that have been led by Una and Thomas, we had been looking at approximately an 8.2% rate increase for this coming financial year. Now that rate rise was being driven, 70% of it was being driven by core or essential services. So increases in the cost of the wastewater treatment plant services, water, and also refuse collection. So those were pretty important for us. So obviously the challenge council now has is how do we achieve a minimum rates rise, protecting those essential services, but we also need to accommodate two really critical factors into our budgets going forward. So clearly the first one is, like all territorial local authorities and obviously businesses out in our community, our revenue has been affected by the lockdown and by COVID-19. So our revenues around fees and charges, but equally from the proposed deferments to try and target some support to those businesses most affected, is impacting on council's revenue moving forward. Equally, we often receive grants and support from philanthropics towards projects. So often some of that capital expenditure support is also disappearing because a number of those organisations will have taken a significant hit as a consequence of COVID-19 as well. So that's one part. So we've obviously got to look after those essential services. The second part was recognising that we will have a shortfall in the revenues we would normally expect going into an annual plan budget. The third area, and it actually gets picked up again on some of the strategies further around, is making sure that we have adequate funding to support the recovery planning that we're undertaking. So that's the partnering with other agencies, either through Rotary Economic Development, so working with our business leaders or working with other community groups, but equally looking at our investment around capital expenditure. So those were the three aspects that really put some pressure on our ability to hold a rates increase at a minimal level. So if you think about that 8.2 and you simply think about the impacts of reduced revenue and a sum of funding to assist with recovery, we would likely have a rates increase significantly higher than 8%. So there's been a lot of work being done already where managers are looking at how they can aggressively reduce costs within the different areas of council to minimise that rate increase. So we need to talk to you a bit more about that as we get to those final decisions. But the intention there is to take a prudent approach to rating and minimise the rate increase as much as possible. So I've talked about one aspect, which was resourcing for recovery. Now, that's the next of those strategies, councillors, which is the economic recovery planning. So the key point there is the resourcing that needs to be available to work in partnership with government, with Te Arawa and the business leaders to shape those recovery actions, either in the short, medium or longer term. So for me, that's a description, and I'll keep it simple, between operational expenditure and capital expenditure. So that is an area of operational expenditure we need to make sure we have the capacity for within this annual plan, is to support those activities. If you think about what RED is currently doing, they're meeting with their sector groups and their steering group on a weekly basis, and that will certainly continue for the next 2 to 6 weeks as they try and shape up some interventions there through those groups. So that's really important. The final one there is investing in recovery. So obviously the government's expectations are that, and if we think about our parallel strategy to the government approach, recommence existing projects as quickly as possible. Councillors, we've signalled to you that the Provincial Development Unit is keen to help us by moving forward their funding for the Provincial Growth Fund projects, so that we can use their funding first and actually get those projects recommenced as quickly as possible. And we've talked several times today in this agenda about the importance of council continuing to undertake its normal activities and its normal program to make sure we're supporting local businesses, contractors and their allied suppliers. So really important for us. And equally, as we start looking towards the results of those government bids, those Crown Infrastructure Partnership projects, there is a potential that we may have to look at match funding or some sort of contribution or support into some of those, but obviously that's a set of decisions that will have to come back to council at a future date. However, we need the capacity within our annual plan to make sure we support those. The next strategy we want to take into developing the annual plan and the consultation document, councillors, is this one around the prudent use of debt funding. So we've underlined in the slide in front of you the word consider, because there's obviously some risks if we start looking at using temporary debt to lessen the rates increase. So as I've talked about previously, we need to fund and support recovery. We need to invest still in those core and essential services, but also we need to just make sure that one-off costs potentially could be funded by debt, operational debt, as a way of minimising some of that overall rate increase. So we've talked previously, councillors, and we supplied a discussion document to you about some of the learnings for the Rotorua Lakes Council in its response to the global financial crisis, where rates rises were held artificially low, and that led to a number of years of where debt increased around operational expenditure. So really important that we're very clear about the reasoning why we might consider using temporary debt and how we would then recover back to properly funding operational costs in subsequent years. So really important. The next part, councillors, is planning to adapt. Now, we've had a long discussion about the success of moving through the lockdown process, level 4, how that and what that might mean for restarting Rotorua's economy and New Zealand's economy, and frankly the global economy. There's a number of factors that are still will be dependent on future decisions or how successful other actions are. So one of the things that we need to retain into thinking about this coming annual plan year is that we may need to adapt the program that is put forward. So councillors, we may need to sort of look at either speeding up or slowing down some of our projects. So there will be a continuous recognition of the need to review our programs across the next year at least. So when we set an annual plan, it's not locking it in and just simply rolling it out. It'll be a case of us looking at what's the next most important thing to invest in, or what decision do we need to take. So we need to adapt to that quite quickly. The seventh strategy there, councillors, is emerging wider impacts. So one of the things that we need to consider is how we retain flexibility to work with our partners in responding to some of those wider impacts that may occur within our community. We've talked today about the impacts on a number of our sectors, which could lead to increases in unemployment to quite considerable levels. So one of the things that council may need to consider is some of those wider well-beings. So how do we support additional services, or how do we support other agencies to deliver services where their workload may have increased substantially? So one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that council invested in navigators to support the community access funding and access support around the Ngongataha floods. We may need to work more closely with agencies like MSD if they see an increase in volume that makes it very difficult for them to respond to those who might need to access additional benefits or additional support. So council needs to be flexible and be able to work with other government agencies to make sure we're providing that support to our community. And finally, councillors, the eighth of those strategies we want to take into shaping or reshaping the annual plan is that maintaining direction. So the Local Government Act is quite clear about the role of local government, and that is to ensure well-beings of communities in the short and into the future. So whilst we're very much focused on a response to COVID-19 and how do we recover as a community and an economy, we can't lose sight of that longer term purpose of local government. So very much a keen focus there to say, look, that's articulated in Vision 2030. We've got very clear set of goals, vision, direction, and some strengths that we need to focus on. Now, this may impact on our ability to reach some of those goals, but clearly we've got to take that longer term view. For those who heard Ganesh Nana or refer to the presentation by Ganesh Nana as part of that forum last week, he was very clear that for local government, they very much needed to keep that longer term view on what they needed to focus on. So whilst we're all very much looking at the short term, it's actually that long term view which we can't lose sight of. So councillors, that's a quick summary of those 8 guiding strategies we'd like you to confirm so that council staff can then go away and reshape the annual plan, budgets and programs, and reflect back to you also a revised consultation document that really articulates what COVID-19 has meant to this year's annual budget process and how we're going to retain that flexibility and address all of the issues that are encapsulated in those guiding strategies. So happy to answer off any questions, councillors.
Great, thank you for that. I suppose at this stage, Jeff or Thomas, did you want to add anything? It was the subject of a very comprehensive workshop.
Steve, I don't think I have anything to add at this time.
Okay, great. So we'll go to questions or clarifications sought. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Your Worship. The 3 concerns here you might care to address, John Paul. I wonder how sensitive we are to the need to not just help with recovery in tourism, but for the industry to essentially reconstruct bottom up in the light of the avalanche of information about how long the recovery and how deep and vicious the depression is going to be. That's the first question. So reconstruction versus recovery. The second is the sensitivity, I think, to the collapse in the affordability of rates to ratepayers and the importance of using temporary debt, never been so cheap, up to the point of even sustaining a rates freeze or cuts. And the third issue I'd like to raise is the marginalisation of some ratepayers, not including business and iwi, who are represented in sector groups. The marginalisation of some ratepayers at this time is potentially a major source of ongoing questioning and conflict and difficulties, which are quite easily avoided. Thank you.
Your Worship, I think there was three main questions here, and I'll start with
recovery.
Yeah, potentially the first and the third, but I might just throw across to Thomas to talk about the second, which was the use of debt. So Councillor, you asked the question about things like the tourism recovery, and because of the significant impact on tourism, about whether we're seeing a reconstruction as opposed to a recovery. Look, in the previous discussion we had, I tried to highlight that we actually have a strong platform of domestic visitation, but equally, you're partly correct in suggesting that there is a number of activities and attractions and businesses that were almost exclusively centred on international visitors.
That's right.
For some, they will potentially have to look at their future, and it may be reconstructing in a different way to at least start taking advantage of that opportunity around a domestic market. So for some, the changes that they will be required to make will be much wider than simply a recovery type approach. But that's for an individual business to make that determination. I think the second part of it, collectively then, Councillor, they will be contributing into how that can be done collectively as well from those sector groups and through that business steering group. So I think the important thing here is that the businesses need to lead that conversation themselves. And at this stage, I don't have anything else to add to that. They're the right ones who know their business, know their sector, and know what tourism could or should be in the future. I think they need to start coming back to us with how they wish to shape that. The second one you asked around debt usage, Councillor. I tried to highlight there, councillors, that we started with an 8.2% proposed rate rise from the workshops we'd been undertaken, with the vast majority of that being focused on essential or core services, and the needs to keep funding those. So that's an absolute fundamental of council investment. And I've talked then about our loss of revenue, but also our need to support and fund recovery. Those impacts on revenue and the need to fund recovery, and you've highlighted a view that we're talking a depression rather than a recession, are considerable. So if you start from that basis, Councillor, we're well above 8% starting point. So I think the organisation has been extremely hard on itself, looking for areas of savings as we try and get a potential rate rise down as low as possible. And that has extended into a view around using debt to a limited extent to fund some operational expenditure, which is one-off. So it's quite a significant balancing act. And if I stop at that point, I'll pass to the man with the biggest balancing problem to do, Thomas, who might want to add to that.
Thomas, coming in.
There we go. Yeah, look, it's just reinforcing what JP said. It's that difficult balance between short-term and long-term, and obviously debt at the moment is incredibly cheap and is likely to be so for probably the medium term, but it's finding that balance between the purposeful use of that debt and funding the right items, because ultimately, as we all know, that debt does need to be repaid, and so long as it's only one-off and not operational expenditure, rates will generally have to increase to repay and support that expenditure in the future.
And I think answering off the last question, I'm finding it difficult to understand how there is this view amongst, and I don't know who they are as ratepayers, but I would have said we're working very closely with the stakeholders who are importantly making decisions and thinking about their sectors. So those business leaders in Te Arawa are heavily involved in shaping what they see as the appropriate actions that need to be taken for themselves as businesses and for themselves as a sector, and potentially looking across at the support of local government and central government. So those, I believe, are the right conversations with the right stakeholders underway at the moment. As they come back to council, if there is anything that comes back to council, our normal and the processes we always have is our annual plan consultation and the processes we're involved in making decisions about what projects go forward. So councillors, I don't see any deviation from how we engage with our community in a business as normal year. You know, I reflect back on where we've created strategies and plans in the past, our general approach is to work with those in stakeholders, the key stakeholders. So it's focused engagement with those who know, those who are affected, and shaping a plan. But in all cases, they often come back for ratification by council and for wider engagement. So I see no difference from the process that we're currently undertaking. So those business sectors, those groups are working on, with the knowledge base they have, shaping some potential interventions, projects and initiatives that they may carry forward themselves, or they may ask council to be involved in. Now, that becomes part of that wider community discussion where all ratepayers, through our normal annual planning processes or long-term planning processes, have the opportunities to engage in that kind of process. So I can't see any difference between what we normally do and our response here under COVID-19.
Right, now we move to Councillor Coburg.
Can I have a supplementary question?
I know you put your questions. We want to have all councillors to have an opportunity to ask the questions. If we've got time at the end, we'll look at supplementaries, but I'm sure all councillors want to turn. Councillor Rotorua.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have two questions. The deferral, the rates deferral that we've got in place, are we going to perhaps have a discussion at some time? I understand not for this May business, but at sometime about widening who is applicable, who can apply for that rates deferral. So it's been quite narrow at present, and I just want to make sure that at some stage in the future, and I'm particularly thinking of businesses, some small businesses, that there might be an opportunity for them going forward in terms of the rates deferral.
Is there a criteria established? Is that really what you're asking, Councillor Rotorua?
Yes, I think it's quite narrow at present, and I want to make sure that in the future, well, over the next 12 months, that businesses, particularly businesses, but others, can fit into that deferral area for rates.
Your Worship, I think this is really one Thomas needs to talk to.
Because there are some small businesses that mightn't, you know, that are exempt or excluded from that, and I want to make sure that we can have some discussion about ensuring that they can look at that rates deferral.
Yeah, so just let me reassure council that obviously the deferral program is limited to certain sectors that we believe will be most significant. However, in the communications that are going out with the rates notices, we are advising that anyone else, if they are having difficulty, they can at any time come and talk to us and talk about what those options are. And so we anticipate, therefore, that there may be some other businesses, and if they can demonstrate the hardship, demonstrate that they follow the actions based on the criteria of the others, that will probably be in a position to offer them a similar deferment.
Well, yeah, Madam Chair, I just feel that we should be not saying, you know, experiencing hardship and everything, because most of our businesses are experiencing hardship. So why can't we just, you know, sort of include those businesses? If they're not experiencing hardship, they won't need it. But, you know, I don't want to make it onerous. I want to make it as comfortable as possible for the small businesses to say there's an opportunity for us for a short term to seek rates, to be part of the rates deferral policies that we're putting in place. So I just don't know, you know, we've got very proud people out there who've been providing services and have been in business for a long time. and who are hurting. And I just want to make sure that everything that we put in place, they can take advantage of too. I mean, they can, come up and use as well. So that's my point.
We cover that off on a previous workshop where Thomas did give the assurance that anybody, not just a sector, not picking winners, can come and talk and put their case. And I think as long as I know there's criteria established, I think that's fair, and it's got to be across the board. Thomas, is that your assurance?
Correct, Your Worship. And we've actually got an example just this week where we've had a business that's approached us and we've had a discussion with.
So it's underway. That's good. Are there any further questions? Councillor Bentley?
Thank you, Mayor Chadwick. I'm just reiterating what Mary Pecker has just said, and I'm relieved that we are going to sit there and let other businesses, perhaps, that are feeling the pinch come in and start talking to council. My other concern is the rents that council is receiving for council-owned land, and I'm thinking majorly by Carter's down to Palmer's, those types of properties which council owns or manages. Are they able to come and talk to you about rent relief and associated costs?
Thomas, can you answer that?
So again, many of these businesses have already made contact with us, and we are having discussions with them with regards to appropriate relief. So yes, that is well underway.
Right, and are there any further questions? Councillor Kaifong?
I'm not really questions, just a comment from me. I'm supportive of these strategies. We've had an opportunity before at a forum to go through these strategies in detail, and I took the opportunity at that forum to ask quite a few questions, so I'm comfortable with supporting the strategies going forward, and there'll be the debate that comes from this around the debt funding and the other bits and pieces that come out of the strategy. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Wang?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a little comment in number 3 that the chair of Te Tata o Te Arawa board is Te Taru White, not Te Tata White. And I think it will be really good if we continue to push the message out there that anyone can contact council regarding their current situation, their current financial situation, to ask for support regarding rates during this time.
Thank you. And that's really about our communication that has to go along with our annual plan. Yes, you're so right. And I would like everybody to speak on this, please, so that we get a good feedback, because our workshop was, quite comprehensive. Councillor Yates?
Ka pai. And I did have my hand raised, and then I took it down as a point that Fisher raised. Mine is about a comment. I don't have any questions because I think I asked my questions as well in the workshop, but it was more around the comment that this is open for everyone. The other thing that I'd like to acknowledge in here is the significant amount of land that iwi actually hold and pay rates on as well. So it's important that the messaging and the communication is clear about the opportunity to apply for a deferral. So kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell? Councillor Maxwell?
Can you hear me now?
Aye.
Aye. No, the workshop was excellent. Can I ask you, JP, you mentioned there the Progressive Fund will be moving funds forward. Can you just briefly tell me how we're going to benefit from that, other than getting the money beforehand? But because we have a bit of a timeline to do the programs, don't we? But please just update me on that.
Councillor, I might just pass that to Thomas. So I think Thomas's issue there is obviously we've particularly like something like the wastewater treatment plant, we had capital expenditure and debt proposed within our long-term plan. So if we receive any funding, that gives council some additional headroom. Now, the Provincial Growth Fund of paying or giving us the grants rather than on a matched basis up front is probably something that Thomas needs to just talk briefly about.
Okay.
It just has a temporary positive impact on our cash flow and our borrowing headroom. So yeah, just a short-term positive impact, which is pretty good to have at this time.
And finally, Madam Mayor, I want to say that Te Arawa had a Zoom hui last Saturday, and I was really pleased that I was part of it. We had 86 participants on that, and it was very, very positive. And it included our local MPs, and also Peter Rice also was there, and Witta Gardner and many others. And can I just indicate to my fellow colleagues that it was a very, very positive Zoom hui for a couple of 2 or 3 hours on Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I see Jeff wishes to say something. I just wondered first, Councillor Tapsell, what we need to be giving our indication of support to is the overall strategies rather than just the detail on the prudent approach to rating. It's overall, how are we feeling about those 8 approaches in the strategy?
Your Worship, if I may, that was exactly the point that I was actually just going to raise. In that, I think the significance of the decision that you're about to take is that staff will actually go away and look at applying those 8 strategies to the construction of the draft annual plan for 2020-2021. So it is actually essential that all 8 strategies have been carefully considered by council, because the output that you receive on which the consultation document will be structured will be built around all of those 8 strategies.
Yeah. Well, I would love to speak. I think they're very cleverly put together, all 8, and you can't take one alone. And the aspect that I think all of us as councillors should be really concerned about is that loss of revenue. We're seeing it from other councils about how devastating it is, and just remembering the impact that we've already had on our employment, and where we need to put some targeted stimulus. The aspect that I'm really interested in, and I see it's happening around the country, and we're seeing it from different ministers of the Crown, but I saw in Waikato, Minister Twyford saying, you can't come to us as government to put our investment, whether it's Provincial Growth Fund or infrastructure investment or shovel ready, unless you've put some skin in the game yourself. So that is about us investing ourselves in the right areas for our economic recovery and our 4 well-beings. So I think you can't take one of these strategies away and the wheel won't turn. It'll be a wobbly wheel. So I like the whole package together, and I'm very concerned at, I have to say, the rhetoric. If people say freeze rates, and I was a ratepayer, I'd say, oh, okay, to pie, that's a good thing. But for the loss of revenue that we will get and our inability to invest in the right aspects of these 8 strategies, that would be even more devastating on our community. And we heard that very clearly from both Ganesh Nana and Peter Rice, the economist, in our workshop, that is not an option on the table, but you need all 8 aspects of this approach and this strategy. So I'm totally in support of this. And I think it's been very well thought through. And I do like how it also shadows really the direction that we're hearing from central government across the board. So I'm certainly in support of this. So right, Councillor Donaldson, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Worship. Look, you've asked for everyone's views, and we've workshopped this one pretty thoroughly, is my view. I support the strategy, absolutely, fully back it. We do need to take a long-term view. There's no free lunch, and we'll be paying our way out of COVID-19 for years to come.
Yes.
So it's not just this annual plan. It'll be our strategy for years, but our strength is in our partnerships with Te Arawa, with business and central and local government. So that alignment with the thinking of central government for me is important. And you know, I'm not going to go on, but in terms of the calls for freezing rates, I think I'll just end with a quote from John F. Kennedy. It was in the face of a different crisis to this one, but he said there's risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long-range risks of comfortable inaction. And I think that sums it up for me. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And it's certainly not an easy future that we face when we finally get back what our annual plan will look like. Councillor Rokawatate, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, you're right. We did workshop these, and I do support them. I have to say that we workshopped them and we had some good kōrero. And I really want, and particularly after the last 2 hui I've been on in the last couple of weeks, where we had some economists giving us some good advice, and particularly looking at, they were drawing on their overseas experience. So that was very, very helpful. But we do tend to, in the kōrero, in the conversations that I've been listening to over the last wee while, we talk a lot about our loss of revenue, and I can understand that. I mean, that's very clear. We've heard from JB today about our loss of revenue. But we have businesses in our community that have lost their businesses, that will never recover again from their businesses. We have families who have gone out of work. They have no jobs. Yeah. And I am getting somewhat hoha when we continuously focus on our loss of revenue, when we've got people in our community who were vulnerable before, and they're in a worse position than now. So, you know, I think we've got to really there are social issues that will develop in our community, significant health issues that will develop in our community over the next 12 months that we haven't even anticipated.
That's right.
And so what I'm just saying is that, yes, we do want this recovery, our recovery plan to go ahead as soon as possible. But our constant woe is us that I'm hearing around the table. Council's got no money, well, you know, and all of this greatly, but we've got businesses who are in the same position trying to recalibrate and get themselves into recovery mode as well. And sometimes I think I would just like us to be a little bit more understanding in the language that we use about our losses, because actually there's loss in the community as well. And I'm very mindful now that I don't want us to be seen as, well, it's all about us. It has to be about sacrifice sharing as well. So, but I want our recovery to get up and ready as soon as possible. But be ever mindful that there are people who are really in survival mode right now, and they want us to show a little bit of compassion, particularly in the words that we use. And it's not all about us, actually, our loss of revenue. It's about them as well, their businesses and their jobs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would support that this is a collective impact that we should all be very concerned about. And that is something with the 4 wellbeings guiding us as a council that we are mindful of, that we've got to look after the most vulnerable as well in our community. Councillor Tapsell, you haven't had an opportunity yet. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wasn't going to ask any questions because to me it's very self-explanatory actually. We've got the background paper here right in front of us, and actually we need to start changing the way that we think, because this is completely an unprecedented time. We've never had to face an economic impact like this, where we are looking at not only a recession but a depression. And so, you know, this has been unprecedented in terms of we haven't seen these levels of unemployment since after the World War. So, you know, I am in support of what we've got. And for me, it's actually about 3 things. It's about stimulating the economy through investments in the projects, building that business confidence, and lastly, so that we can provide jobs. So this money that we're putting aside, the spending that some people are criticising, is actually direct spending and stimulus into our economy that is going to help our local contractors, that is going to help our locals get into jobs, and not only in the short term but in the long term as well. So I do totally support these guiding strategies for the annual plan. I do realise that it is for some maybe quite ambitious, but if we don't take an ambitious approach, we are going to leave our community and our families well behind. And I'm certainly not going to be responsible for not taking an opportunity like this, because there are 3 things that will come and go. We know this, it's opportunities, time and words. And so for the words I have in this meeting, I totally want to support this direction and thank the staff for the work that they have done.
Thank you. So everybody's had a turn now, and I'm asking, is there a mover and a seconder?
Excuse me, Madam Chair, Councillor McPherson has his hand up still, and Councillor Maxwell has just raised his hand.
Sorry, my apologies. Councillor McPherson. Sorry, my apology. Councillor McPherson.
Councillor, you need to put your microphone on.
Shall we move to?
Okay.
No, he's on now.
You can hear me? Thank you. As I've been listening to the debate, it strikes me that the balance between the 8 strategies is quite sound. There's a range of perspectives there that are all consistent with the general strategy being used by central government, as John Paul pointed out, which is a Keynesian approach to boosting demand. And that demand is going to require arranging our affairs in such a way so as we both increase the supply of money and increase its velocity. And that in turn will very soon translate into greater levels of confidence for investment and indeed push the recovery along. You've heard my arguments on the need to reconstruct the industries that we have that are utterly devastated by the dramatic loss in demand. So I won't reiterate those, but it strikes me that if I wanted any change to those general strategies, it would be to add 1 word to acknowledge what a number of councillors have said. That instead of just a prudent approach, which is about financial prudence, it's also important to have a prudent and humane approach, because at the risk of boring you all, rates affordability has dramatically, it's collapsed as much as demand for international travel. So with that in mind, I'd suggest we add the words "and humane" before the word "approach." Thank you.
Thank you. We don't put emotive words, but I'm happy for officers to reply to that. I think we'd all agree that we'd want it to have a mindful impact on our community. JP, do you want to respond to that?
I suppose councillors, and I pick up also from the statements made by Councillor Okawa Tate, who's right in making sure we have that sense of wider community. And I apologise if in any way our presentation skewed away from the view that council services are actually part of that, making sure we provide that support for our community and that well-being's focus, which is critical in our community. I think the issue we've just had there raised, and I suppose draw your attention to that emerging wider impacts, that need to keep our capability as an organisation in place is another really important part of this. So whilst we keep saying we need to focus on our ability to support recovery, and recovery has an economic focus, actually most of the services are about those well-beings for us as a council. So you could take a view of saying, look, we slash this, we slash that, we retrench from social and community services, but actually the demands on those are likely to be higher as we go forward. And councillors are aware that we put a significant amount of money into the social sector in the way of grants. So one of our options that we will have to retain as part of this is to focus on those four well-beings and make sure we don't lose sight of that. From the work that we had done, we talked a lot about the impact of the austerity approach in the UK. And what was evident there was that lowering of life expectancy, which is unheralded in the UK since the war. So since the Second World War. So those comments raised by Councillor O'Kawa-Tate are critical, that there is those wider well-beings, not just economic, it is community, it's social, it's health, it's all of those aspects. And actually the council organisation as a whole contributes and supports all of those. So I think the retention of the council's wider responsibilities around those well-beings is actually us delivering against probably Councillor McPherson's question. There is a humane part of this as well. So it is really important to see that as part of our well-being purpose and the vision and direction that we've set as an organisation. So not minimising it, but I believe it's captured in what we have as the core of what this organisation is focused on. I am kind of questioning though, we've had this question around rates affordability raised a number of times. Now, I think there's actually some misleading statements that have come through into some of the conversations there. We've had rates rises which are often being driven by levels of service change or the additions of services. So when people talk about increases in rates above inflation or CPI or whatever index they choose to use, often there's been a change of service that has been part of our change as an organisation and have been consulted on as part of that communication with our community. So again, I look back at something like the refuse charges or those who have now joined on and part of reticulated sewage schemes. There has been a number of changes within that which does change the rates level. But equally, and I think we're very conscious of it, if you look at council's rates, particularly its residential rates compared to other council areas, we are not as high on average as the Western Bays or Tauranga. Our rates rises are lower. So the kind of question around affordability is an interesting interpretation there of sort of a whole bunch of other wider issues that are coming through, valuations changes. And obviously we've had a significant number of discussions in the past, councillors. We undertook a rates review not so long ago, and one of the central issues there was affordability. So some of that came back down to how we use our uniform charges and where we put the burden of rates was some of those areas that we needed to take a longer term view of changing. So I don't know if Thomas has anything else to add in that space.
JP, if it's helpful, picking up the sentiments that I've heard, instead of adding them in, and changing the wording, we've all heard about the impact on our community. Should we have an underpinning statement that these 8 strategies collectively are supported by our focus on the 4 well-beings? So it's not one of the 8 strategies, they follow right through. I'm just trying to be helpful.
Your Worship, if I may, I think can I just sort of guide you back into first principle? And it was the principle that was articulated that the kaupapa has not changed.
Yeah.
And the organisation affirms its role in the community through Vision 2030. And the role of the organisation in contributing to our community equally is enshrined in the wellbeing statements.
Yes.
And so the principle of the purpose of the organisation is captured in that first I think the first of the strategies is that we're not actually changing the direction of the organisation, or that's what that principle proposes. We continue to be on the same pathway as what we actually have been for some time. The difference is that we are now faced with a most difficult situation that we also must respond to. And that's where the other 7 principles have actually been brought in to supplement that, the first principle that was put forward.
So it is captured in the strategies collectively, and then these go out to the annual plan consultation. So yeah, I'm supportive of that. Councillor Maxwell?
Madam Mayor, when I spoke last, I did indicate that I was strongly supportive of the 8 strategies that we had in the workshop, and also just hearing the debate too. I do support that the words, the Vision 2030 go in there as well. And just whilst still on the workshop, I mean, it was called for there that leadership was called for, and confidence, and I'm right behind it. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. So we've got Councillor Wang, and then I'm going to call for a mover and a seconder to put the motion. Councillor Wang?
Good, Madam Mayor, thank you. I'd be happy to move this after. It's just a small comment that for everyone to know that there is a difference between the general and targeted rates rises. And so just to put it out there.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, are you seconding?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I am. And I'm just supporting what the Chief Executive has just said, that the 4 well-beings are captured in the framework strategy document here, which we've had presented. And while I support the sentiments of humanity and social responding to social impacts, they are captured in that framework. So fully supportive. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that was a wonderful discussion, and thank you everybody for contributing. So I'm now going to put the motion that Council adopt the 8 guiding strategies to develop the 2020-2021 annual plan in the areas of, and I won't name them all, we've gone through them as shown. All those in favour, please raise their hand.
That is carried.
Thank you. Did anyone wish to have their vote recorded against?
I think I prefer an abstention, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Right.
And
we'll note the abstention. Thank you. Right, we move now to the Government Funding Agency, and this is the last item before we go into public excluded, where we will have a 5-minute break. Right, the Government Funding Agency. I need a mover and a seconder to receive the report, the amendment to foundation documents for the Local Government Funding Agency be received. I have a mover, Councillor Yates. Seconded, Councillor Donaldson. All those in favour, please say aye or raise your hand. We're getting good at this. Great. It's carried. Now, Thomas, you're going to overview a very technical report, I must say. Quite a lot of reading in it for us.
Yeah, and my apologies, Your Worship and councillors. I guess there's an expectation that you probably didn't have to read all the appendices. They are quite complex documents, but nonetheless they are attached, should someone wish to do so. So just a little bit of background. The LGFA was established nearly 10 years ago, I guess with a view of providing more efficient funding to local authorities. In 2013, Council joined the LGFA as a borrower and a guarantor, and the documents that I've attached are part of the foundation documents that we signed at that time. The LGFA has always considering opportunities, and at its AGM back in late last year, they approved 2 changes that obviously need to be endorsed by each participating council. The first change is the ability to borrow directly to council-controlled organisations. Where historically, and we are similar, we borrow on behalf of the airport and then we on-lend to the airport. This will have the ability for CCOs to cut, I guess, the middleman out and become more efficient and borrow directly from the LGFA. Just rest assured that doesn't provide any CCO with the ability to go directly and borrow. Council approval is required into that process, and that is a requirement of the LGFA. The second change is around the borrower notes. And so effectively for every, as I said in the paper, for every $100 borrowed, we leave a portion behind as borrower notes with the LGFA. They're quite complex financial transactions, but effectively it has the effect of strengthening the LGFA's balance sheet and providing it with funding and improving its liquidity, which ultimately means that we get more efficient borrowing rates when they go to the market because they're a stronger organisation, and it also provides them funding to participate in the short-term borrowing regime, and that's why we've seen as well we tend to borrow more short-term from the LGFA than we do on our banking facilities because they are much more efficient with regards to driving their costs down. And so what they would like to do is just increase the amount of borrower notes that are left behind. Just reassured that when the debt comes up for maturity and is repaid, those borrower notes are repaid, and we also get a return on that, an investment return. So, and so what we are obviously asking for that for us to participate with the LGFA going forward, and considering nearly 90% of our borrowings are currently with the LGFA, and will likely increase, that we are therefore asking the council to endorse and the item with regards to signing the amended documents that are included.
Right, and before they do, Thomas, there may be some questions for clarification. For me, with the LGFA, we are able to borrow at a much cheaper rate, aren't we?
100%, yes.
Thank you. Right, questions, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question through you, Thomas, it was around the amendment that allows a CCO to borrow directly from the fund or from the agency if it's 100% owned by council, as all of ours are. So the question is, will the CCOs be required to get council permission or sign off before they go ahead with that borrowing? Thank you.
Yes, that is a mandatory step that can't be bypassed, and the LGFA have confirmed that they will need confirmation. Yep.
Now, are there any further questions? Councillor Kaifong?
Just a question. So in terms of the overall borrowing limits, the CCO borrowing direct will still be included as part of the council debt ceiling? Or is there some other way in which the borrowing level between LGFA and the CCO is determined differently?
It's a little bit of a complex answer. Generally, when we talk to our community and we consider our debt position, we include the whole group debt. But technically, with regards to the underlying debt limits and the ability to go to the markets, the CCOs are generally not included. And as an example, and many of you don't know that we had our credit rating reaffirmed just before, I think the week before lockdown, and in their credit rating as well, the element is that they exclude their CCO debt so long as the CCOs are in a position to be able to service that debt themselves.
Thank you. There appear to be no more questions, which is fine. Thank you, Thomas, for that. And thank you for the overview there. And well done on the credit rating. Councillor McPherson, you have a question.
Over the implications of that last answer from Thomas, just to clarify, CCO debt is not counted as part of the council's debt. when you are calculating the extent to which you still have debt headroom available for borrowings. Is that so?
No, as I said, Councillor, it is a complex answer. Simplistically, no, but if the CCO is not in a position to furnish it, to service its debt itself and is reliant on council income, then obviously we include it. But if it's in a position where it can service that debt for external sources, then no, it wouldn't be included. But overall, when we talk to our community about overall debt, we take the complete group picture.
That's reassuring. Thank you for that.
It is in our reporting. Thank you. So I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder for the motion that Council endorses the amendments to the Local Government Funding Agency Foundation documents, and 3, that the Council authorises the Chief Executive and 2 elected members to execute the documents which will allow Council to continue to participate with the LGFA, A, B and C.
We have Councillor Rakawa Tate and Councillor Yates.
Thank you. So I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye, or no, raise your hand.
It's carried.
Thank you, and thank you, and congratulations, Thomas, for hearing about our credit rating. That's sort of the only bit of good news we've had for a while, in a very tough time. So before we go into the resolution to go into public excluded, there are 3 items for consideration: adopting the confidential minutes of the previous meeting, recommendations from other committees, the confidential items, and the business partnership request. And the reasons are to enable commercial or industrial negotiations, commercial sensitivity, to protect a person's privacy, and to allow free and frank expressions of opinions. Before I go into that, or before we stop the live streaming, I want to make a comment. So I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder to go into public excluded. Councillor Donaldson and Councillor Kai Fong. All those in favour, please say aye. Oh, raise your hand. Thank you.
Carried.
Carried. And before we do, could I just make just a remark to staff, actually, who've worked incredibly hard in a very strange time, especially in the lockdown period. I've been incredibly impressed at the daily interaction that we have had with the chair meetings, with the community board and Te Tātou, and with that extra workload that you've had of trying to keep us all in the loop at the same time as getting business as usual documents to us. Can I assure the community too that with the delegations of authority to the Chief Executive, they have not had to be enacted, and that's because of the wonderful relationship that we have kept going every single day with Zoom meetings at 9 in the morning and again at 3 in the afternoon. So Deputy Dave Donaldson and myself have been incredibly well informed as the delegation set out, and I'm very impressed at how that is followed. For all of those in the public, we've attempted to hold these meetings when appropriate for you with live streaming. It is such a relief for us to be going back to level 3, even though many of us have to wait until committees of council recommend at council. I would like also to the Chief Executive, please pass on to the staff that have been working in the Welfare Centre, all of those who were redeployed, who accepted a change of role so quickly and reacted so responsively. I've had nothing but glowing feedback about our staff that have worked in the Welfare Centre, the Customer Service Centre, the Planning Division who've kept things going, every single division of council. So well done in very, very trying times. And I'd just like to extend our council, I'm sure all of us feel this. We had no idea of the uncharted waters that we were entering. And we've done a job that I think has kept our community informed and kept that confidence going. So well done to everybody and to the councillors that have also been openly communicating with us all. Thank you for that. So we're now going to vote. Did we vote to go into public excluded? We did.
Yes, you've done that.
We did. So we'll have a 5-minute gap. Could I just, while the recording is turned off, don't